Well, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Bible Talk, the place where we connect the Bible and everyday life. My guest today is Brian Dollar. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's been in ministry for more than 30 years, and he has just released a new book called I Blew It. That's all about failure and how we can learn from it, how we can grow from it. This conversation is funny, practical, helpful from a mindset as well as a what we do when we experience failure and turn failure into growth. So you are going to love my conversation with Brian Dollar. Well, Brian Dollar, so good to have you on Bible Talk, brother.
Well, I'm excited to be on with you. It's been so long since we've been able to really have a deep conversation. I'm ready to cover a lot of good ground today.
Oh yeah, man, it is good. We used to see each other at least yearly, if not twice a year, it seems
Yeah.
like, at different family ministry conferences and different places we were speaking. And then it's like a pandemic happened. Like we just all of a sudden
Something
didn't
came
connect
along
and
and
things
kind of
got
messed that
canceled.
up. Oh man, no doubt.
All right. Well, man, when I saw both the title of your newest book, and because you've written a couple, and when I saw the title of this, and I'm like, okay, this has got to be a conversation that we have because so many people struggle with it. The title is I Blew It, and it talks about failure. And so I'm just tell us a little bit, but well, before we dive into failure, paint a
Sorry, tell
picture
us
a
about
little
you.
bit for people who don't know you yet about a little bit about your journey, what you do now, where you live, your family. Give us the 1 to 2 minute overview of who is Brian Dollar.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I am the associate pastor at First NLR, First Assembly of God, North Little Rock in Arkansas. And I've been here about to celebrate 24 years
Wow.
on staff here, and came here as the kids pastor back in 1999 and transitioned into the role of associate pastor in 2016. And I have a beautiful wife, Cherith. We just celebrated 25 years of marriage this year in March. And I've got two kids. My daughter is Ashton. She's 23 and got married about a year and a half ago to one of the other pastors on staff with us here, who actually happened to be a kid in my kids' ministry whenever I first got here. So pretty cool how that came full circle. And then my son Jordan is about to graduate college from Full Sail University in Florida here in just a few months, and so we're excited about that. But I've been in ministry for 30 plus years, and I have just really enjoyed the opportunity to lead families, kids, just tons of individuals. Kind of just one step at a time through the spiritual journey that God has them on. So I'm honored to be able to do that and hope I can do it for many years to come.
Right, no doubt, for sure. And the so shifting gears to,
Yeah.
you've been in ministry for 30 years, you've been married for 25, you've been a parent for 23, and you write a book on failure.
Yeah.
Which means since I've been in ministry for almost 28, or I guess if you had youth ministry stuff, I've been in ministry for 33, something like that, been married for 27 and been a parent for 21, that you and I have had about the same amount of opportunities for failure.
Right. I think I might have been more proactive in taking advantage of those opportunities.
Okay.
But I do understand the question because, I
So,
mean, especially in ministry, the tendency, well, all human beings, our tendency is to talk about our successes. We want everybody to know what we've accomplished. We want everybody to know how we've climbed the mountain and, stuck the flag staff in and we've conquered it. And so I get that question, why write a book about failure?
Right.
And I think the reason why that question comes up is because we don't always recognize just how big a deal that failure is in our spiritual journey, and the pivotal role that it plays.
Mhm.
When especially in here I am, in ministry, even in ministry, it's very vital that we understand that. And here's the thing: is ministry is not about perfection. It's not about always doing exactly the right thing and always coming out on top. It's about growing. It's about helping others, and it's about admitting that we're human, because we are vulnerable to mistakes and failures. But we have to learn how to overcome, or at least how to adapt to those failures, how to
Mhm.
grow from those failures, because we work with people, and you're around people every day. And when you are working with and surrounded by people, guess what? You're not going to bat 1,000 in your relationships and in every interaction. You're going to strike out every once in a while. You're going to fail. And when you do even simple things like assuming the wrong motive of somebody, we've all been guilty of that, right?
Sure.
Maybe you didn't have enough coffee that morning, and man, you responded really poorly to somebody when you first walked in the door at the office, or maybe you just dropped the ball with an assignment that your boss gave you or that your pastor asked you to do. Those are everyday mistakes that,
Mhm.
if we learn how to manage those mistakes, and we work to minimize the impact of those mistakes, we will go a long way. Because it's, as leaders, it's not about will you blow it. The
Right.
title of my book is I Blew It. It's not about will you blow it. It's how will you respond when you blow it.
Right. Right. And it's moving off of what kind of going off of what you said, not moving off, going off of what you said earlier, that this focus, this kind of constant focus of our society on sharing your successes. And certainly we can learn from what helps somebody do something right and achieve it, and set goals based on that, and plans and all that kind of stuff. But we can't relate to, I mean, it's like we idolize people that
Yeah.
who don't share their failures, and yet we can't relate to them because they don't they seemingly never fail. It's like if we consciously step back, we know that everybody has messed up a lot, but the sharing of that now, looking at from a spiritual growth, a spiritual development, I want to dig into that a little bit deeper, because
Yeah.
how have you seen, and as you studied it and analyzed your own failures and wrote about them, because you know this, sometimes we don't even know what we think until we write it down or say it, right?
Right.
And how do you see failures and mistakes playing into our own spiritual growth and our own development?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. You just hit the nail on the head, that we make assumptions that other people don't make the same mistakes or as many mistakes as we
Right.
do. And I think a lot of that is our culture, social media, everybody putting the polished picture up and just only, talking about the great things that happen in their life.
Mhm.
And so when we start comparing, we compare our blooper reel to other people's highlight reel.
Yeah.
And that causes us to feel less than. It causes us to feel shame. But I think if you look back in your life and you look at the moments of real growth that you had, it was in the seasons of challenge, and sometimes it was even in the seasons when you fell short and you had to figure out who you were and pull yourself up and move forward anyway. And I think it's crucial that we approach moments of failure and even mistakes just with humility and a readiness to learn. Allow God to show us what was missing in those moments, because failure is simply one step in the journey of God's vision for our lives. And
Mhm.
it's an opportunity for us to kind of lean in to faith and to refine our approach, and
Right.
maybe even refine our communication, because our mouth gets us in most of our failures and troubles anyway. But our understanding, and throughout the Bible, I mean, over and over, we see people who failed big time. I mean, David, dude, that guy, he was a man after God's own heart, yes, but he also was a guy who blew it over and over again.
Right.
He failed to stay focused on the war effort and then ended up falling into adultery. You look at Abraham, he failed to remain patient for God's promise to come to pass. And he kind of decided, I'm going to do things my own way. And he got way out of line and way ahead of God's plan. But really, if you look, I'll tell you, since we're kind of talking about the biblical side of things, one of my absolute favorite stories in the Bible, especially when it comes to failure and redemption, is Simon Peter. I mean, you think about that guy. Peter was, he was loudmouth and he was, passionate, and he was always kind of putting his foot in his mouth. But he was certain. You think back to the Last Supper. He was certain that he would remain by Jesus' side when that pressure came, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did he do? He denied him not once, not twice, but 3 times, denied he even knew him.
Right.
And really, when we look at Jesus's response to that, the next time he's face to face with Peter, he could have come and said, "Hey, buddy,
Right.
Didn't I tell you? No, maybe you'll listen to me next time." And give him this real impassioned lecture, like we as parents tend to do with our kids. But he didn't do that. Instead, Jesus invited him over to the campfire, sat down for a meal, and just looked at him and said, "Do you love me?" And gave him 3 different opportunities to express his love to him. And then he told him, not, "Well, earn it, buddy," or take a seat in the back, but instead he said, "No, I'm going to use you to feed my lambs. I'm going to use you to feed my sheep. You're going to build this church. And even though you failed, I've got a plan for you. And if you'll just dust all that shame and guilt off of your shoulders, off your back, and you'll accept that I forgive you and that I got a plan for you, great things are about to happen." And what does happen? Peter is one of the greatest vessels of God to establish the church that still exists 2,000 plus years later.
Right.
Now, if that doesn't tell you what's God's view of failure, then I don't know what does.
Right. For sure. And I mean, it's interesting that you are sharing this story now, because last week I was speaking at a conference and one of my 3 talks was on that John 21 story, and it hit me. I mean, as many times as I've soaked in that, as many times as I've looked at that, what God was saying, he was speaking to me specifically about failure and forgiveness last week, before I even knew this is, was my mindset was not on this week's Bible Talk recording, right? But it was something that right after that, we see the book of Acts, right? We see him move forward. We see him go into that. And which means a couple things. One is he not only accepted the forgiveness from God,
right,
but he also had to move on and forgive himself too, because if he was wallowing in all the mistakes he ever made, if he was just soaking every day in the failure, there's no way that he would do what we see him do in Acts.
So true.
So I want to ask you specifically about that, because I've been thinking about that a ton the last few weeks as I was preparing for that conference, then teaching through it, then talking to people about it, and now hearing you talk about this. When you let's say somebody's watching this and they have been repeating the failure from a year ago for the last year, they've been rehearsing that, and they hear you talk about, you and I talking about failure and learning and forgiveness. How does somebody start to make that shift? What's kind of step 1, 2, 3, if you will?
I actually do have not necessarily steps 1, 2, and 3, but I've kind of observed that for you to have a healthy response to failure, there's 4 phases that of the aftermath of failure that you need to go through. But it all starts with having a biblical understanding of failure and God's response to it. We tend to, when we fail, if we're not going to handle it right, we'll either argue our point of view, like, no, we're not wrong, and just try to convince people that's what was supposed to happen, or we try to cover it up and pretend that it didn't happen. Or like you just said, we kind of bury our head, or we run from God, and we try to find a place to just, wallow in our sin. That's what Adam and Eve did. Right after
Right.
they sinned and discovered their nakedness, they went and hid from God. But
Right.
it's interesting. What did God do? God went looking for them.
Mhm.
And he went to find them. God didn't wait for them to come to him and express their sorrow. He went to find them and give an opportunity to have that conversation. And so the four phases that are really important, no matter what size failure that it might be. You can't skip a phase. You have to experience them all if you're going to truly learn what you need to learn from a mistake. Phase number one is commiseration. Commiseration, feeling that initial sting of the
Mhm.
failure, like you described, the pain and the horrible. I mean, you let people down, you let yourself down, you even let God down. And let's be honest, failure hurts. I mean,
Right.
it does hurt. I don't care how long you've been alive, how long you've been in ministry. I don't care how mature and old you are. Failure hurts. And it's easy to fall into that trap of kind of endlessly commiserating your
Right.
failure and never moving out of that first phase. And most people who can't get past the commiseration phase end up quitting the faith or quitting the ministry. They just can't get over what happened. So I suggest this. I suggest that in phase one of commiseration, you spend enough time kind of wallowing in the failure in order to get a true sense of what was lost or what was
Mhm.
damaged as a result of your failure. And because if you don't understand the damage you cause, you're bound to repeat the failure. And so
Oh,
you've
yeah.
got to have that commiseration. But then within a day or so, really, I don't think it should last more than a few days. You got to get out of that commiseration phase because staying there isn't going to help you grow.
Right.
So you got to move into phase number two, which is examination. From commiseration to examination. And in phase two, examination, you got to ask yourself tough questions. You got to examine your action. You got to examine your motives and your missteps. I mean, you got to really look at it because examination is critical. Because whenever I mess up, I try to ask myself four important questions. I ask, why did it happen? Because I want to know, was it a lack of planning? Was it, unrealistic expectations, poor communication, wrong motives? I mean, whatever.
Mhm.
So why did it happen? And then I ask myself, this is all in that examination phase. Was it avoidable? Because a lot of our goofs could be avoided, if we just planned better or we
Right.
communicated better or maybe executed better. But, some of them can't. So I ask, was it avoidable? Thirdly, if it could have been avoided, what specifically could I have done to prevent it? Maybe you blew through some roadblocks that you saw, but you're like, that doesn't matter. I'm going to keep going anyway.
Right.
Maybe you ignored good advice, which we all do too often. So whatever it is, what could I have done to prevent it? And then fourthly, what do I need to know, be, or do to avoid repeating the mistake? Now,
Mm.
all of those questions are in the examination phase. Then you've got to move from examination to phase number three, and that's reconciliation. Reconciliation is where you go and you speak to the person or the people who were hurt by your failure.
Mm.
See, if you lied to somebody, go to them, admit
Mhm.
it, and tell them the truth. If you forgot to follow through on something, tell your boss. Come clean with an official apology. My pastor taught me this a long time ago. There's three pieces to an official apology. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And what can I do to make it right? You have any of those three not included, and it's not an official apology. So I'm sorry, I was wrong. What can I do to make it right? So that's all in the reconciliation phase. Admit it, confess it, get it out there in the open. And then phase number four, preparation. Preparation is where you're preparing for the future. You're putting safeguards in place so that mistake doesn't happen again. Because it's okay to make mistakes, just don't make the same mistakes over and over again.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
better learn from them. So you get spiritually prepared to lean on God's strength and not your own. And then this is big. You turn the page, you leave the past behind, and you move ahead. That's a whole chapter in the book is on turning the page. And I use the story of Moses and how difficult it was for him to kind of truly accept God's plan for him to be the leader that led his people out of Egypt because of the failure that he had when he was there last time. He was like, no, I can't do it. I've been out here too long. There's no way I can't do it. See, failure is going to happen, but failure didn't have to be final. It doesn't have to knock you out of life, out of faith, or out of ministry. You have to learn how to respond properly to failure and learn from it. That was a long answer, I know, to a short question, but those are the four phases of the aftermath of failure that I think we have to go through all of them and not try to skip things and just because it's uncomfortable, we try to get to the end and pretend it didn't happen and move on. Never do that.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. I love that way of. I love things when they're simplified. I tell people all the time, simple gets applied and complicated gets set aside. So I love that. I love that, the clarity of that. So now taking that and putting that into real life, so that we opened up with people just kind of share their successes and don't share their failures. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I know you've written a book about it, so I'm sure you've included some failures. So what is take one of them that you can look at that you really learned from, and walk us through kind of what happened and then what you learned from it and how that played out.
Well, real easy, and I won't tell the whole story because it takes a while to do it to do it justice. But basically, in my early kids pastor days, I was convinced that I was the world's most creative person, and all my ideas were so clever and so great. And I rarely put any prayer or true time soaking it in, asking God, "Is this what you want me to do?" And I was convinced that my good ideas were the way to go. And so one such good idea that I really, really regretted was, we just got through mentioning Moses, but I was doing a VBS on the life of Moses, and I wanted the kids to really understand, especially the part of the Moses story that dealt with the plagues. And I thought, what would be great is if we took the 10 plagues and created an experience for the kids to experience what it was really like for the Egyptians to go through the plagues. Now, if you just
can't imagine this going poorly.
No, God sent the plagues to teach Egypt a lesson and to bring judgment on them. And I think, in my mind, that we should use it for a kid's experience. So, just on its face, it seems ridiculous, but it really was in the execution of it all, because every single room progressively got worse and worse. It started off okay whenever I had this illusion where clear water was poured into a pitcher that had some red food coloring at the bottom. And so, when I poured it back out, it was red, like the Nile River turning to blood. That was great. The frogs room was great because we had a bunch of plastic frogs and sound effects. Kids were loving it. But then, when I got to the plague of darkness, where I took all the kids in the room and then shut the lights off, I don't know if you realize this, Keith, but a lot of kids are afraid of the dark. And that didn't go over well. Not only that, but the boils room, the kids were freaked out and started running out and screaming because the people that had the boils on looked like a horror movie. But all of it came just drastically crumbling down when they got to the last one that was the plague of the death of the firstborn. Now, I thought my leader did a good job. She was dressed in full Egyptian garb, and she was sitting over in the corner. Kids walked in, they're looking over, and she's got this baby doll, and she's just kind of crying a little bit. And then all of a sudden, once the last kid got in the room, my leader screamed just this blood-curdling scream, "My baby's dead!" Well, needless to say, those children immediately started crying, running out of the room. I mean, it was pandemonium for the next 15 minutes. And the next few days, I was answering not emails, because there was no email back then, but phone call after phone call of parents wondering, what was I thinking? So here's the lesson I learned.
Oh, my word.
There's a big difference between a good idea and a God idea.
Mm-hmm.
And why would we settle for our own little creative minds that are finite and only can think of so much when we could plug in the ultimate creative mind, the God who created the entire universe, and ask him to give us God ideas that, number one, not only are they going to be more effective because he knows the audience that we're ministering to, or that we're talking to, and so he knows what they need, and he knows way beyond more than we ever could imagine or even think of. But when we lean on our own creativity, we cut God short. It's like drinking from a thimble when we could be standing under Niagara Falls and experiencing God's amazing downloads of creative juice. So that was a big lesson I learned early in life through that failure. I had to stop because, man, you talk about feeling like a failure. I thought I was going to lose my job because I had so many parents that were mad at me. Right. But I had to ask myself, okay, what caused this? And where did I go wrong? I never asked anybody their input. I never prayed. I never really allowed for a process of wisdom to take place. And so I learned a lot of things about myself and my own motivations. And I learned a lot about what God wanted to do through me, and that he wasn't sitting back waiting on me to impress him with my good ideas. Mm-hmm. Instead, he was patiently waiting for me to come to him and ask him to fill my mind and my heart with God ideas so that I can minister effectively and represent him well.
Yeah. Oh. as a former youth pastor who's made plenty of things like that, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I can see that whole thing playing out.
Oh, it was something. I go into full detail in the chapter in the book, and you just won't even believe. There's a whole nother room I didn't even talk about that you're like, are you kidding? Why would you even do that?
Right. And and maybe this is a good place to wrap up. I look at the people sharing successes instead of failures, and you share the failure. You look at the 4 phases of walking through that, and now we look at something where, and not wallowing, but forgiving yourself and moving forward as you've accepted God's forgiveness. We've looked at all these different things, and I look at that story, and I think, okay, not only did you learn something by going through the phases, but you've shared this and obviously now put it in a book that's then helping other people. And so it's when we hide that failure and we ignore that failure that it not only doesn't shape us, but it doesn't help somebody else. And you may have heard this before, but I heard somebody once say that the failures we share become lighthouses for people headed toward the same rocks.
That's good.
And I've
not heard that quote before. That's really good.
Yeah. And I just love that, and just see so much of that in that, because that embarrassing moment early on in ministry could have derailed you, could have been something that if you didn't walk through that, could have been something that you never shared in a productive way. Even if you learned something from it, if you didn't share it, I mean, there's so much that God does with failure. And I'm so grateful that for your friendship, thankful for you writing this book and sharing so authentically and
absolutely.
I'm sure, like everything else you do, humorously as well. So
right. Well, and that's what I was going to say is that the subtitle of the book is The Biggest Mistakes I've Made in Ministry and How You Can Avoid Them. That was the whole goal of writing the book. It wasn't just tell funny stories and make people laugh. Although there's a lot of humor in it, there's a lot of gut-wrenching realism to it, and I really get to the heart of each mistake. And the goal is that you'll read, and that this will be a gigantic lighthouse for you to avoid those same mistakes. I want you to learn what I learned without having to feel the pain that I felt. And experience the shame that I went through. But I think it's a good book that I think applies beyond even ministry. I think people in everyday life will be able to relate to the hard issues that I discuss in it. And really, it's all about learning to turn the page and learning to allow God to write a new story for our lives, and not allow failure to define who we are, but instead allow it to lead us to a place of greater understanding of ourselves and of the God we serve.
Good. It's great. So if people want to grab the book, they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the book is releasing. I'm not sure when they'll hear this, but September 19th is when the book will release on really everywhere. Amazon, Nook, well, you can buy it everywhere. But also, they can go right now to briandollar.com, and I've got a special deal there that not only will they get an autographed pre-release copy, but there's a whole bundle, including a video masterclass that I recorded, and they can actually sign up for a 7-day Bible study that I wrote for the YouVersion Bible app.
All right.
They can get right now that kind of goes along with the book. So pretty cool. If they go to briandollar.com, they can pick it up anytime.
That's awesome. Awesome. And I know you're on other spots. All of your handles are slightly different. So Instagram's easiest, Brian Dollar, Twitter or X, Brian Dollar 1, Facebook, Brian.Dollar.
Well, the problem is that so many of you wouldn't think that there's more than one Brian Dollar in the world, but
Right.
there's multiple. And
Right.
I was apparently a little bit late to Twitter, and so they already had Brian Dollar. I had to put a 1 on there. So
All right, Brian. Well, this has been great. One thing I love to do at the end, we've got just a few minutes left, because I know you've got another interview. I got another thing I want to look at. I love asking some rapid fire questions that have nothing to do with anything we've talked about.
Okay.
You ready? I
think.
Okay. So it's late at night and you're having a snack. Is it sweet or is it savory?
Oh, sweet. If I'm going to do something at night, I'm going to make it count.
Okay. And what's your go-to?
Oreos.
Oreos. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Are you the one that makes your family 5 minutes late or forces everyone to be 5 minutes early?
Half an hour early.
Half an hour early.
I do not like to get anywhere late, ever, ever, ever.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And just so everybody knows, that's legit. He was perfectly on time. I think a minute early, which in the world of recording interviews, a minute early is like a half an hour early in the world. When it's all the
well, I didn't want to sit in your waiting room for 25 minutes with
right.
nobody to talk to.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. What is one city that you've never been to that you would love to go to? And what's one city that you've been to that you can't wait to get back to?
A city that I've never been to that I'd love to go to is Rome. Just the rich history there and biblical history. I would love to go to Rome. And a place that I've been to and can't wait to get back to is Jerusalem, which I'm actually going in October. So that'll be fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much. This has been fun. It's been fun to catch up, and can't wait to get a hold of your new book, and I'll be sharing it with plenty of people. So
awesome.
Appreciate your heart, appreciate your humility, your generosity with your own failures and the lessons you've learned from them. So thanks so much.
You got it, Keith. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We will see you on the next episode of Bible Talk. See you later. Bye.